I'm Elle Embers, and this is Cosmic Curiosities. Hello and welcome back to Cosmic Curiosities. My name is Elle, and if you're on a journey of trying to connect back to yourself, release your past to step into a brighter and better future, to gain clarity, confidence, direction, or simply just come back to a sense of peace and learning how to calm the storms of your mind, and would like to know more about how past life regression, cosmic channeling, or energetic coaching can assist you in your journey, you can send me a message on Instagram or visit my website, lembers.com. Now, today we are talking all about astrology and giving you some helpful tips on how to use this tool to assist you in becoming more aligned with your truth. Sharing her expertise with me today is Dana from the Self-Help Witch. She is an astrologer, a teacher, a podcaster, and an advocate for self-awareness. So, let's dive in. Hi, Dana. Thanks for joining us. How are you?
I am doing very well. How are you?
I'm good. Thank you. So before we get started, I thought we'd just ask a couple of fun questions to break the ice. So what is your favorite color, food, and song?
Oh my God. I'm so bad at these questions. I feel like it depends on the day, right? But
Yeah.
today I'll say I like black. Somebody said once that black contains all colors. I don't know if that's true or not, but I like the idea of that.
Yeah.
So we'll roll with it. And I find myself wearing black a lot as well. So favorite food, it's a toss-up between chocolate and cheese for me. I just had a baby in February and I'm breastfeeding, and my son is in this phase where he's spitting up a lot. And I've read that like dairy can be an issue. And I'm like, don't make me quit eating cheese. Like, please let that not be the issue. So those are my foods. And then favorite song, I truly don't know how I could ever choose. I've been into Father John Misty a lot. I'm kind of late on a lot of musical trends because I tend to like listen to the same thing over and over again, but
Yeah.
I'd probably pick a song of his at this point.
Oh, nice. I'm the same. Don't worry. It's like I have the same playlist from 15 years ago. Like, it's all the same.
Yes, I just can't get out. I don't want to listen to anything new. I want to be able to sing along.
Yeah. Have that nostalgic feeling.
Mm-hmm.
Well, thank you so much for sharing. Would you like to, I guess, introduce yourself to everyone and tell them a little bit about what it is that you do?
Yeah. Well, I'm Dana, and I am the host of the Self-Help Witch podcast. That's the name of my business, is Self-Help Witch. I'm an astrologer. I'm a teacher. And I'm like a school teacher by day, but I also find that teaching is like part of what I do at Self-Help Witch. So really what I try to do is help make astrology and self-awareness more accessible, and usually by combining the two. I just find astrology to be a really potent tool for self-awareness and personal growth. So I like to help make astrological concepts that are complex. There's a lot to it. Really more down to earth and concrete and tangible, so that we can actually use these tools and take it out of the just purely conceptual and into the more practical applied approach.
Amazing. Yeah, get a bit more simplified and grounded, so a bit more understandable.
Absolutely.
I love that. So I understand that there's quite a few variations or different types of astrology. Is there one in particular that you focus on?
Yeah, that's a great point. And I find that's a stumbling block for a lot of people when they're starting to learn about astrology. It was something I encountered too. I don't know if you've ever Googled, for example, like what the North Node means. I feel like this is something people are really fascinated by. And you're going to find so many different takes on what it means. And that can be so confusing if you don't recognize that there are different schools of thought, there are different philosophical approaches. And so that's a really great point. I have been trained more with traditional astrology. I've taken 2 years of traditional astrology coursework with Adam Ellenboss from Nightlight Astrology. If you guys are not familiar with him, he's fantastic. Free YouTube content 5 days a week. So look him up. But I do also take a modern flavor because what I do is inherently psychological astrology. And for those of us who maybe aren't familiar with like all the different sort of approaches, I feel like you can kind of boil it down into more traditional, ancient Hellenistic astrology that's a little bit more about kind of the external, kind of the environmental context the approach, how we tend to interpret things, which I think is really useful. But then you also have the modern take, which is more psychological in nature. So that's, to me, sort of the big two divisions, and we could definitely get more granular with that. My foundation is more traditional, but I certainly include those psychological takes as well.
Amazing. So you have a bit of a hybrid approach and getting the best of both worlds.
Yes.
Yeah.
Let's say it that way.
I love that. So in coming into terms of astrology, how has that helped you along your journey? What lessons has that helped you uncover and progress through your own evolution and growth journey?
Man, I mean, we could talk about just this question for the rest of the episode, probably. So I'll try to be succinct here. But I came to astrology after going on my own self-help journey. At the end of 2019, I decided to quit drinking, and that was a choice that I really never thought that I would make. It was a big part of my life for a long time, but it just kind of got to a point where it was clear that it was getting in the way of my happiness. So I decided to stop. And ultimately, I found that I was a lot happier without it. So I kind of got the ball rolling on the self-help kick. I was feeling really good. I was going to therapy. And then I kind of had this existential crisis about 9 months later where I had been on such a high and I had hit all these goals that I had for myself. And I just realized one day that none of it mattered to me. I wasn't actually happy about any of it. So just for example, like I had been super healthy, like quit sugar, was working out every day. I started a little healthy baking business. I was going to farmers markets and stuff. And it just was clear to me at one point that I didn't care about any of it. And the reason why was because I just realized that I was doing it for validation. I wanted other people to approve of me. And I was like, how did this happen? I've been so dedicated to my personal wellness and my own healing journey. I'm in therapy. I'm doing all these things. How did I work this hard for these goals that I don't even care about? So I just knew at that point that I needed a different modality. Like therapy was helping, but it was still a place where I might fall prey to that, like, validate me kind of mentality, where I'm not being honest, right? So I needed something that I could do on my own that would allow me to be honest with myself. And I started with tarot. I thought that tarot would be a really good modality, and it was, but I didn't trust myself enough yet to have tarot really help me. And that's just me, right? That may not be the case for others. So to me, astrology and the birth chart was a little bit more concrete than tarot in terms of the symbols and what they mean. And I found the chart, the birth chart specifically, to be like this cosmic mirror. It really just like reflects back to you these things that maybe you forgot about yourself, and even like the context of your life that you sort of take for granted that's shaped you. It can just reflect back to you so much that can heal you or validate you. Really, validation is healing too. But that was kind of how it all started, was needing this modality that could help me come back to myself. And it was history from there.
Yeah. I feel like you're definitely right when it comes to tarot. There's this element of needing to trust yourself and what's being said, and that it's coming from you and through you. Whereas astrology is kind of like, well, these are the facts. This is what the astrology is sitting at, and this is how this can translate in your life. So I feel like I can very much understand when you're stepping into that world, that being a lot easier to kind of connect with, because you're not having to, I guess, dig up this sense of trust and lie to yourself that you trust this and believe this, when you still kind of need that that external foundation, I suppose. Like that makes total sense. So I'm so glad that you bring that up, because so many people will turn to a modality that they may not necessarily be ready for in the state of the journey that they're currently in. And that's totally fine. Like you can come back to it. That's great. But just having that awareness of like, hey, this maybe isn't the best place for me to start. This is probably better fitting for me. So I love that you bring that up. Thank you for sharing.
Yeah. And to your point too, you can always come back to it. These things aren't going anywhere. So that's an excellent point.
Yeah, totally. And moving through, I guess, the phases of learning how to translate astrology into your life and to your chart specifically, what was your experience navigating through that?
Yeah. I mean, it was a little overwhelming at first because of how I am. So, and maybe listeners, you will relate to this if you have learned about astrology. You want to learn everything. Like you want to inhale. Like, I need to know everything about my chart right now. That was kind of how it started. And I'm like that with everything. So maybe that's a unique experience to me, but usually other people are like, yeah, I was kind of like that too. Because it's so fascinating. Like there's so much to learn and know. So it was a little overwhelming in the sense that I was trying to figure out everything all at once. And I want to caution people listening to, like, that's not possible. Even though the symbols are, concrete and the chart is a static image, the fascinating thing about it is the symbols are always revealing themselves to you in new ways as you learn and grow. So just as an example, I'm a Libra rising, and that was one of the first things I looked into. The ruler of my first house, the planet that's in charge, is Venus. And that planet is a very important planet in your chart, whatever planet rules your first house. It's said to be like the helm of the ship. It's telling us the direction that your life is going in. So I'm trying to understand my Venus placement, and I'm realizing I'm a people pleaser. And I've been living in sort of the shadow of Libra, because we know Libra to be, the sign that's all about relationships. And I'm like, oh, that is me, but like in a really bad way, in a way that's not helping me at all and making it harder for me to know myself. This is why I dedicated myself to all of these things that actually didn't matter to me, because I was trying to be validated. I was trying to people please. So it was overwhelming in the sense of like, there's so much knowledge and I can't know all of it all at once, and I want to, but also, oh my God, this is really like opening my eyes to these things that I had no idea were at play.
Totally. I guess it's kind of balancing that slow progression through and not rushing in and being like, I'm going to take it all in now. Yes. And then having to process and uncover more and more about yourself. I mean, I find that all the time as well. Like, no matter what modality it is, I'm always like, oh yeah, I'm going to dive into this. And then I end up overwhelming myself. And I'm like, okay, I should take a step back and just reassess, slow down. But yeah, I mean, when it comes down to understanding astrology, I know a lot of people, like, they have their own interpretations. They have their own ways of just kind of navigating what this means to them, because everything, of course, would have a positive and a negative side. So I understand some people will see a certain placement and be like, oh my God, this is terrible. Whereas other people might take this placement as, oh my gosh, this is a great opportunity. How did you first face coming to your chart?
Oh, this is such a great point. Good and bad are relative. This is like thing number one to understand when you're approaching your chart, because all of us have positives in our chart and all of us have challenges. What I mean when I say good and bad are relative is that what looks bad or looks challenging ultimately could be really good for us spiritually. And what's looking really good or easy in our chart might actually keep us stuck in one place when we're meant to be progressing and moving forward. So keep that in mind. And also keep in mind that we tend to look at ourselves, unless you're like a really developed person, a lot of us look at ourselves inherently negatively. So we're going to see the negative before we're going to see the positive. And we're going to go to the negative even with our positive placements. Like my Venus placement it's in Pisces. That's actually a great place for Venus to be. But my first thought was, oh, I'm a people pleaser, which wasn't wrong, but I wasn't seeing the positive either. And so I think that's so important when we're looking at our chart, that the things that look negative, they're there to help you in some way. And I guarantee if you can look at that placement from a stance of like, what has this given me? Even if it's been challenging, what has that challenge taught me that's made me who I am today? You're going to find something productive out of that.
Yeah, I love that. I love that explanation. Thank you.
Yeah, of course.
I was very much the same. Like I have to admit, I'm not experienced in astrology. I don't have a lot of knowledge behind it. I know my basics, but when I first looked at my chart, I was like, oh my gosh, all of my placements are just on one side. And I was like, I have nothing in these other houses. Like, does that mean like I'm never going to have anything here? Like, what does this mean? And I was just freaking out. My friend's like, no, this is like, you have so much more opportunities here because you don't have all these placements in play. Like, this promotes more flexibility. And I was like, oh, okay, that's an interesting way to look at it. And I didn't feel so limited by where I had placements and where I didn't.
Okay, so I love that she brought that up. If you feel limited looking at your chart, there's a different perspective there, right?
Mm.
Like I believe that looking at our charts should be expansive. And if you're feeling that way, like definitely find an astrologically minded friend to help you see it a new way. And that's the beauty of going to different astrologers as well, because we all have our own perspectives and you're going to get something different from each person. So
yeah,
there's always more to gain.
Absolutely. So, in coming to terms with your understandings of astrology and your interpretations, how has this helped you through different life topics along your journey? So, your career, your relationships, how has astrology assisted you through those?
I would say it's helped me understand who I am in relationships. Just being a Libra rising, that's a big part of my journey to begin with, right? Is like the dichotomy of the me and the we. And for those of you listening, if you're like, well, how do I know what's that in my chart? Look at your first and seventh houses. So your first house is going to be very much about you and your personality, your character, your psychology. Your seventh house is going to speak to your close partnerships. So whether that's your romantic relationships, your best friends, your business partners, that's where we want to look for our relationships. For your career, you can look at your second, sixth, and 10th houses. Most people just talk about the 10th, and absolutely the 10th is the place of your public reputation. So it's how people see you out in the world. But your second house is your talents and resources, and your sixth house is your daily work. And these houses all speak to each other through a trine, which is a helpful relationship. So when we look at those together, we can get a really clear idea of what kind of work we're meant to do. And to answer your question, that's kind of how I've looked at my career. That's always been something that I've been kind of navigating. I've never felt confident about what I want to do with my life. And I kind of just fell into teaching. And I did realize later that there was sort of some shadow stuff going on that like led me back to high school, like some unresolved stuff from high school I was trying to fix by like becoming a teacher.
Yeah, wow.
Yeah, which is like not great, but I do love teaching and I do love knowledge and sharing knowledge and creating learning experiences. And looking at my second, sixth, and 10th houses, they're all water signs. And they'll always be the same element too. So that can tell you a lot. And what that told me is I'm meant to be doing work where I can connect with people and where we're dealing in emotions, we're dealing with feelings. And my second house is Scorpio. So there's something really like I'm good at helping people transmute things. That's kind of what I got from that. And I've used all of that information to end up where I am now with Self-Help Witch.
Yeah, amazing. So, in coming to terms with, I guess, the shadow work behind the motivation for part of your career, how is that affecting your growth through astrology? Was it sort of, this is what I'm meant to do, this is what I feel like is right for me? Or, oh, I have to do this because I have to deal with this element?
I realized that I had made decisions based on kind of shadow elements after the fact. So I was already teaching, right? And then I was like, oh, actually, this thing that happened in high school, like I had kind of a rough experience in high school. I had a lot of like falling out with friends, and my parents got divorced, and it was just not a good time. And I used astrology in what I call reflective astrology. So essentially, I just looked at the chart from around the time I was in high school, what was happening astrologically at that time, and what was it activating in my birth chart. And that helped me see, oh, like my Pluto was being activated hardcore and some other things that I don't remember. But essentially, it helped me see that there was a lot going on at that time. Now I was already teaching and I need a paycheck. So I was like, okay, I can't just quit. But maybe I work towards something new. So let me see where my strengths are here. And it was clear that my strengths are teaching. I have a lot of stuff in my ninth house, which is indicative of teaching. I've got Jupiter there too. Jupiter is often affiliated with teachers. So I'm like, all right, how can I continue teaching in a way that feels more aligned to me? And I was already using astrology to help myself, right? And to return to a greater sense of authenticity. So I was like, is there something here? Like, can I use this tool that I found and help other people who feel sort of lost on their path and want to return to a sense of truth in their lives? And honestly, it took me a long time to say yes to that because there was a lot of imposter syndrome. There was a lot of doubt, and there was a lot of no one's going to care about this. No one needs this. But I just was like, I'm going to try. I'm going to just try and see. And, I'm still very much in the like building phase of things, but I do sense like the more I talk to people and the more offers I put out that this is something that would help people. And this is a modality that can really change your life by giving you the truth of who you are back.
Yeah, astrology is a huge tool, and it's definitely something that is growing in terms of need and want and, understanding of it. Because for so long, everyone's like, oh yeah, I know my star sign, but that was kind of it, right? We didn't know much more than that. But then when astrology became a bit more mainstream and more people became aware of it and how useful and beneficial it could be, they were like, oh, what's your top 3? Like, what's going on for you right now? And moving into the transits. And it became a little bit more talked about. And I feel like that has helped so many people in various stages of their journey. But in terms of helping people further their knowledge in astrology and have a better understanding of themselves, are there certain questions that they're coming to you with about how things are playing out in their chart? Are there questions that you see often? Where do people kind of pique their curiosity?
I think the two things people usually want to know, or at least think they want to know about, are career/purpose, which sometimes are conflated, sometimes are talked about separately, and relationships. It's what I see people usually coming to talk about the most. And I feel like a lot of time, usually there's something deeper. For example, I felt maybe a little unfulfilled in my career as a teacher, and I didn't realize the reason why was because I got into it for the wrong reasons. Like, it wasn't really that I just needed a more fulfilling career. It was that, but I needed to understand the why behind the what. And so, yeah, those are the things that people come to me with. It usually kind of goes somewhere else once we get into it.
Of course, I'm sure everything has kind of the underlying meaning, because it's not just the who, what, when, where. It's the why, right? You need that that why to understand how everything kind of fits together. So I understand that. Yeah. So is astrology helpful for a lot of people coming into relationships, like compatibility wise, or connecting with children, for example, and having a better understanding of who they are?
Oh, 100%. And I would say really like the thing to me that's most helpful with astrology is the awareness that it gives you. So don't like write a person off because you feel like you're not compatible with them astrologically, because again, things that seem bad might be really good for us. And the best example I can give is my husband and I are like not astrologically compatible at all. So he's got a lot of Sagittarius energy. I've got a lot of Pisces energy, and these square. And a square is edgy. If you just imagine like the corner of a wall, right? It's like two people running into, but it's also a growth edge. And so our relationship at first was tough because we have a lot of that energy. And so we were butting heads. But what ultimately happened was we both grew as people. And that's not what I love about our relationship is like, I feel like I'm such a better person because our communication isn't just like taken for granted. We have to try. And that might sound bad to people, but I think it's a really good thing. Like my relationship helps me grow as a person. But having that awareness of who he is, that he's got a quick temper, right? And that I'm maybe a little passive and I might be too passive. He reminds me maybe not to be so passive. I remind him to chill out. So it's all knowledge and it's all information. You still have free will, though. You still get to make your own choices with that information.
Yeah, it's finding, I guess, the complications and the complements. So, like, what complements the relationship on both sides? Like you said, your Pisces energy helps him chill out and his, quick temper. You're more aware of, like, oh, maybe I should be reacting to this more. But it's also, yeah, I guess having that understanding of, like, how this benefits you and how this benefits him and your growth together. I find that a lot in my own relationship with my husband. Like, he's very go with the flow, and I'm very like, we need to have a plan. If I have a plan, I'm fine. If the plan changes, that's okay, but as long as we have a plan.
Yes.
So in terms of purpose and career and things like that, what are the key elements people should be aware of or looking for in their charts or speaking to an astrologer about?
Yeah, great question. And I'll start by saying, keep in mind your purpose is not just one thing. I think sometimes that word can imply a singular purpose. And there's not like a magic purpose that's going to make you feel fulfilled.
Yeah.
It's a lifelong thing. So I just like to say that at the front to have the right expectation, right? Like your purpose is something you're evolving toward, and it's not just like one quick thing. But in your chart, what you can look to, of course, your sun. Okay. So your sun sign, not just the sign, but the actual placement of the sun and what's going on with it, meaning what other planets are in that same sign, what planets are aspecting the sun. That can tell you a lot about your spirit. That's how I interpret the sun. The sun is your spirit. It's the part of you that does not change. Just like the sun rises and sets in a predictable way every day, your spirit is the same way. It's that underlying part of you that is here to experience a certain experience. Couldn't think of a better word. So where is your sun in your chart? Oh,
Aries.
Okay. So you're here to experience like that sense of individuality and to be courageous and to be bold, and like your spirit craves that, I'm guessing, based on.
Sounds about right.
So,
yeah.
like that's what I would say for an Aries sun. And what's good about that too, or good to know about that, is the sun is exalted in Aries. So it's a great place for the sun. And what that might mean for you is that it might come a little more easily for you to do those things. At the same time, you may not notice it as much. And that's kind of that double-edged sword of like the good placements is you might not even realize that about yourself because it just comes easily to you. So sometimes we take our gifts for granted,
Yeah.
And so that's one place you can look.
Yeah. I mean, that totally resonates because I have a few girls that I work with, and one of them is always getting up me because I'm an Aries sun, a Scorpio rising, and a Capricorn moon. And I'm always like, oh, I don't feel like I have a lot of Aries energy. I feel like I'm very much more like in my rising sign. And she's like, no. She's like, I definitely see the Aries. And I'm like, no, I don't see it. I don't see it. And she's just like, but look at how creative and forward thinking you are, and courageous you are, and bold you are, and you always say what everyone else is thinking. And I'm just like, oh, do I know?
Yes.
Like, I don't know.
A lot of people have that experience too of not resonating with their sun sign. The same here, but a Pisces sun. I just never really felt like it was me. And I think part of that is like, we just see ourselves differently than other people see us.
Yeah.
And it takes a certain level of like reflection, I guess, and make that connection. And just like age, I think it takes time to connect with your sun sign sometimes. So other places people could look for career and purpose. We talked about the 10th house. There's also an angle that's usually in the 10th house called the MC. So there's 4 angles in your chart: the ascendant degree, the descendant degree, the MC, and the IC. So the MC is like high noon. So where the sun would be at its highest peak. So if we remember what we just talked about, the sun being your spirit and being like that pure essence of you, the MC is where that is the highest. So it's where I like to say like your shiniest self.
That's
So
cute.
thanks. So usually it's in your 10th house, but sometimes it can be in the 9th and sometimes it can be in the 11th. And so that point can tell you a little bit about your purpose and what you're kind of striving toward. And then we talked as well about the ascendant ruler. So the planet that is ruling your first house. Again, that's like the helm of the ship. So it's telling us the direction that we're kind of headed in. That can be a really indicative placement as well.
And if people, I guess, are feeling a little bit stuck, or they're, going through the similar emotions that you went through, that I went through, that I'm sure many people go through, that they're like, I'm not sure what kind of career is best fitted. Like, I don't feel fulfilled in a lot that I do, and I'm not really sure where my passion, I suppose, lies. Is this something that will help them look at what their skills are and what their passions are to bring them together?
I'm going to give some advice. And I will say to start, though, it is so dependent on the chart because everybody's chart is so different. But you use the word passion. And so that makes me think of Mars because we want to change careers for different reasons sometimes. Like sometimes it's like, I just hate this work, or I don't like the people I work with. Like the problem is different for different people. If the problem is passion, I don't feel passionate, look at Mars. And your sun sign as well, because again, that's just going to be like so fundamental. But Mars is passion. It's what you're willing to fight for. And Mars can operate differently in different charts. So again, depending on the chart, right? But I think just generally speaking, that's something I would look at, and what's aspecting Mars. Also, we haven't talked about the moon. I think the moon could be useful there as well, because whereas the sun is like this unchanging part of you, the moon, as we know, it waxes and wanes. It does change. So the moon can be indicative of like your fate and fortune. So it can kind of speak to the things that you will experience in your life. And so it can give you an idea of like the contexts you're going to find yourself in. For example, my moon's in the 9th house. The 9th house is often associated with philosophy and divination, astrology. You hear long distance travel a lot when talking about the 9th house, and that is a thing, but it's also not just physical travel. It is like mental travel, like the traveling you do when you read a book about a culture that you aren't familiar with, right? And so that really made sense to me because I find myself in these academic environments. I'm always learning new things. I'm always like finding new teachers. And so the moon can kind of give you some clues there as well.
Yeah, amazing. That's super helpful. Thank you so much. And of course, this does vary from chart to chart and from placement to placement. And I guess the other question there is, I'm assuming your chart when you're born and how your placements sit, it's going to change throughout your life, of course, because of the transits and everything that goes on. So there's going to be different energies at play. So I'm assuming that if you are finding yourself in, I don't know, perhaps a rut with your career, or feeling like you're lacking passion, or not quite sure on what you should be doing or paying attention to, this could be something that the astrological transits or the energy at play are kind of reacting to with your natal chart. Is that right?
100%, because the natal chart tells us the inherent energy. It's like the seeds, but it's not all going to bloom at once. And that's what the transits tell us, along with there's other timing techniques as well. But I think transits are the most accessible. And so, yeah, absolutely. I found, again, with this reflective astrology piece, it's been one of the most helpful approaches to astrology that I've found. Looking back at times in my life where I felt super confused. And I'll just give an example. I was in a relationship, we were engaged, and I broke up with the person. And it was a very, very difficult decision, like the hardest decision I'd made at that point in my life. And so then years later, I find astrology and I'm like, I wonder what was happening at that time. And I look and Uranus is on my descendant degree, which is like the point for your relationships. So I'm like, of course, I wanted to break free from a relationship. This was the energetic context. And it was almost like it was supposed to happen. And I could have more compassion for myself too, then, right? Because I'm like, oh, there wasn't something wrong with me. I actually needed that to happen in order to grow, because I can see how that helped me grow now that there's time from it. And so, yeah, it can be extremely validating and really help you understand like maybe why you're feeling burnt out from your job or whatever the case may be.
Yeah, definitely. And you bring up a good thing there about relationships as well, is different transits coming into play and reacting to different energy in your natal chart can influence a lot of starting of relationships and ending of relationships and everything in between. Like, I know for me, I've been married twice, and with my first marriage, there was a time in the astrology where it's like, oh, there's something going on here. Forgive me, I can't remember what exactly it was. But it was like giving reason as to why both of us were like, okay, we need to walk away from this now and grow. And, you know, each time I had my children, there was astrology coming through for that as well. So it definitely is interesting looking back and looking at the reflective astrology and seeing how that energy reacts to our natal chart and whether it is a, I guess, beginning or an ending or a growth or, you know, perceived as a positive or a negative or whatever the case may be.
Absolutely. One place people can look to if they're curious and they're like, I don't really know, like, I don't have like a specific time in my life that I want to look at eclipses. You can find, if you just Google like eclipse list astrology podcast, the astrology podcast has a PDF of all the eclipses that have happened in the last 50 years up to 2030, I think. Look at where the eclipses happened in your chart. So for example, if the eclipse happened in Aries, what house does Aries occupy in your chart? And did it activate the themes of that house? Which would be like children, for example. Did you have a child or were children coming into your life or whatever the case may be? Were you creating something new? It is profound. I found how like uncanny it's been where the house topics activated for the eclipse manifested within a few months, if not like right around the time.
Yeah. You talked about key topics there as well for the houses. Are there some more important key topics you would suggest people look for in their houses and their placements more than others?
I guess I wouldn't say that there's like a more important or less important house, but I will say some houses speak louder than others. And so we call these angular houses. They're the first, fourth, seventh, and 10th houses. And so typically, like we're talking about transits, the transits that come through those houses are going to be the loudest, meaning they're going to come through in the most obvious ways and be like hard to ignore or hard to not notice. So yeah, I think that's useful to know. But again, it's so dependent on the chart. For example, if you have a lot of 12th house energy, typically the cadent houses, which are the 3rd, 6th, 9th, and 12th, and they are typically quiet. But if you have a lot of placements there, whenever stuff's coming through your 12th house, it's all getting activated. So again, it's so like dependent on the chart. But I would totally pay attention to any transits coming through the 1st, 4th, 7th, and 12th. Even if you don't have placements there, they're going to touch those points that we talked about.
Yeah. Wow. Okay, cool. That's interesting. I had a friend tell me something the other day about, because there's an eclipse coming up in October. Is that right?
Yeah, there's one coming up like this week as well. Well, in October. So we're recording this in April. Sorry, everyone.
Yes, sorry, guys.
My bad. But yes, in October, we've got 2 coming up.
I'm a little nervous because I think one of my friends said that there was something playing out in my 12th house around that eclipse on, I think it's the 28th of October, he said. And I was like, oh, okay, yep. And and I'm going to be in a completely different country at that time. And I'm like, oh, great.
Oh.
I love this. This is going to be cool. No?
That's like the curse of astrology sometimes. I like call it astrological anxiety, because when you can look ahead, you're like, oh God, how is this going to play out? And especially if it looks scary or is in a house that people talk. The 12th house is the house that people kind of get nervous about. And I understand why. I will say it's very rare that an eclipse is going to like some big event is going to happen on the day. It usually unfolds over time. I've only seen it play out really dramatically, like in one instance. But otherwise, it's like something that unfolds over time. And usually you can look back and say, oh, that's what that was, you know? Yeah. So don't panic. You're going to be fine.
Yeah. Thank you. I appreciate that. But yeah, you're absolutely right. Like these energies take time to unfold, and eclipses are felt for months, right? It's all that energy is unfolding for months. It's not just like, oh my gosh, on that particular day, everybody duck and cover. Like,
yes.
But yeah, I mean, you also said too, the 12th house is something that people tend to have a lot of anxiety around. Why is that for people that don't know much about the 12th house?
So the 12th house is the house of the hidden and the unseen. It's in traditional astrology, the house of things that are separate, like institutions, hospitals, places where people are kept like away from society. And so it's just not very glamorous, first of all. But it's also talked about as, you know, a shadowy place. It's where it's our blind spots. So when people have placements there, it can, or any placement that feels challenging, it's like, oh, well, am I just going to be like sequestered to the shadows, or is my whole life going to be about shadow work? And no, it's not. There's so much to interpreting a placement that goes beyond just like the planet and the sign. What are the other aspects? Who is the planet in charge of that house, right? So I did a reading for a friend who has a moon in the 12th, Leo moon in the 12th, and her sun is in the first house. So I'm like, okay, that's really important, because if you just look at moon in the 12th, it makes it seem like, or if all you know is that the 12th house is shadows, that might seem really bad. But the way I would interpret moon in the 12th is maybe you feel comforted by, that's the moon, doing your own thing. 12th house, isolation, right? It's not inherently bad. And it can mean more than one thing. And your sun being in charge of that house in the first house means that maybe you're trying to like bring that into your personality a little bit more. Like you're trying to bring that 12th house energy into the first house where it can be seen. So there's a lot to unpack, and it's never super straightforward, but that's why the 12th house might seem kind of scary. So don't let anybody freak you out, though. There's no like objective good or bad in astrology, in my opinion. There's too many nuances.
Definitely. And, you know, that's exactly kind of what our other friend said about it. She was like, well, no. Like, let's not freak out. There's positives and negatives. And I'm like, yeah, exactly. It's fine. But I understand why people get anxious about certain astrology placements and things like that. I mean, especially when you can look ahead. And you like, because as much as we look backwards and we reflect, you can also look ahead, and it's going to, I guess, bring awareness to that transit particularly. But again, it's, you know, no amount of anxiety is going to change the future. Like no amount of regret can change the past. It's just we deal with however it unfolds, and it could have a positive lining or a not so positive lining. It just depends on what's going on in your life. But I think too, this is also why people can get confused, right? Because there's so many nuances basically to everything. So it depends on the person and the chart and the interpretation, because it can all vary. So how do you work to make this more understandable?
I'm thinking about when I have a client in a reading, my approach is conversational and I'm asking questions. So what I'm not trying to do is like hit the bullseye by like predicting who you are, trying to tell you who you are. I really try to make my reading about helping you reconnect with something that's true for you, or just like getting you to a place where you can articulate that for yourself. Like that is my goal. So I'm always asking questions. And that would be my advice to anybody who's trying to interpret their chart for themselves too. Don't try to figure it out. Ask yourself questions and figure out what's true for you from there. So if you've got Sun in Aries and you're trying to get a deeper feel for that, and you Google it and it says, oh, you're bold and fearless. When have I been bold and fearless? Do I feel that that's true for me? What are some times where that's been true for me? And then you can dig deeper by looking at the nuance in your chart. What are the planets aspecting that? What else is there? What house is it in? So I guess that would be my advice is if you're starting with your birth chart, be curious about it, ask yourself questions, and don't enter it with the expectation that you're going to like unlock your like level 10 version of yourself, because it's just not what it is.
Yeah, it sounds, correct me if I'm wrong, it sounds a lot like just breaking down big things into bite-sized pieces and like taking those steps along the way and going, well, this is going to assist me with this. And then as you grow from that first thing, you can then look at the second thing and then the third and kind of unpack it and let it all unfold when it's meant to. Is that right?
Absolutely. It's so important for people to hear. You don't need to know everything about your chart for it to be meaningful to you and for it to be helpful. I found myself like getting really caught up in not knowing all the techniques. Like I wanted to know every little nuance about how to interpret. And really all you need to know at the beginning, at least, are like the houses, the signs, the planets. That's already so much. That's already so much information. And you can start there and get a ton of depth out of interpreting your chart.
Yeah. So I guess to tie everything all up in a nice and pretty little bow, what is the advice you'd like to leave everyone with?
I call myself a self-awareness advocate. Like when I introduce myself, I say I'm an astrologer, teacher, and self-awareness advocate. So my advice, I guess, at the risk of sounding like pedantic a little bit, is get to know yourself. I feel like that's the point. That is the point of astrology. It's knowledge only really like does so much for us, though. At the same time, self-awareness has to have a purpose. It has to have an outlet. So self-awareness should like compel us to act and to bring that into who we are. So I would say, like, if you're interested in astrology, you're interested in getting to know yourself, that's amazing. Do it, but don't let it stop there, because you deserve to have like the richest, most rewarding life possible. And that's only going to happen if you take action. So don't fall into the trap of just like perpetual learning and never taking action, because it's really easy to do. That felt more like a soapbox than advice, but hopefully that helps somebody.
I love it, and I feel like it has a lot of impact. Thank you so much, Dana, for joining us today and sharing your unique and powerful knowledge in astrology and self-awareness. Where can everyone find you if they're wanting to work with you and learn a little bit more?
Well, thank you for having me. This was a fun conversation. I am everywhere as Self-Help Witch. So at Self-Help Witch on Instagram, my website is selfhelpwitch.com. At the time of this episode, I will probably have my reading books open. I open them periodically throughout the year, but they're not always open. So you can go to my website and see what current offerings I do have. I also have like courses if you're interested in learning about transits and things like that. So you can head to my website and see what I've got there.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Elle.
Well, this is your Earthside Spirit Guide signing off for the week. If you'd like to know more about how you can work with me, you can follow me on Instagram at l.embers or visit my website lembers.com.